The fortified cabin was built into a shallow cave in a rock face, deep in the evil east. An anchor of front yard was fenced with the gargantuan trunks of ringed Saturn trees, and just beyond the fence lay a vast, coniferous forest. Spotlights illuminated the perimeter. Above the cabin, dug into the rocks, was a sniper in a bird's nest. Akil had built the cabin for his family in secret, preparing a clandestine retirement from the left hand. After a 32-year military career, he wanted nothing more than to leave his brutal existence in service of Iago behind him. There were 7 of them in the cabin, all but one deserters, all but one a traitor to the left hand. Carolyn climbed out of the hatch on the cabin's roof and approached the ladder to the bird's nest. "Akil," she called up to her husband. "Akil, it's nearly 2 a.m. You rest." From the darkness above she heard her husband's voice. "If the baby comes, send Jeb to get me if the baby is coming. He can take a shift so we can both be in the room the moment our granddaughter arrives." Akil considered this for a moment. "Jebediah has his own responsibilities." "We went dark inside to conserve power for the spotlight hours ago. Repairs will have to wait until the morning." "The morning?" Anger welled up within him, then passed like the tide. Geronimo had been a dangerous man to show anger to, so he had learned to control his own. Control was the running theme of his life, and as much as he wanted control of this situation, Carolyn was right. He'd be useless to his little girl exhausted. Relenting, he put his rifle down and descended the ladder. His wife embraced him. "We'll get her through this. With any luck, we'll be traveling to safer parts by tomorrow afternoon." Akil knew better, and Geronimo knew they were here. The left hand would be dispatched, and no matter how fortified the cabin was, his family would be, at best, captured. It was more likely that they would all be dead by sunrise. When his mom came out of her room in the morning, she found Scott at the dining room table, dressed for school, hunched over his notebook, writing furiously. An empty cereal bowl and coffee cup sat off to his right side. He wasn't due to leave for school with Espie until 7:45. So he usually slept until about 7:35, making breakfast a rare meal for the boy. Not that she didn't try to impart the importance of the first meal upon him. Oh, she had him commit to a nutritious breakfast every morning for years, but then he turned 13. Getting this guy out of bed became more a Sisyphean task she'd given up on by now. He was such a stubborn young bull, she'd have had more luck roping Taurus out of the night sky than getting him up early enough for breakfast. Yet here he was. She went to the coffee pot and filled her own favorite mug, the one that said, "Complaint Department, now open." She stood behind him for a moment, wearing her fuzzy pink robe, sipping her coffee, reading his essay from Mr. Bird over his shoulder. "I love that story," she cackled, then sat down next to him at the table, picked up the remote and powered on the TV to watch Early Bird. "Good morning, Mom," Scott said. "Hello, Hemingway," Kelly replied. "Hey, before you go, I need all of your laundry. I refuse to enter your room for anything until it's clean. It's abominable right now." "Okay, Mom." On TV, Lucretia Bird was wearing a yellow floral blouse with purple eyeshadow. Did she clash her colors on purpose? The answer is yes. And those bracelets, why? She loved seeing a strong black woman like herself on television, but critiquing the newswoman's fashion failures was half the fun of watching the show for Callie. Lucretia was interviewing a police spokesman with a mustache and a pink polo shirt. He was saying, "Look, if you cause over $500,000 in property damage, you have to be held accountable for your actions." Lucretia nodded. "There's recent security footage from a pyramid drone that appears to back the claim that he has what can only be described as superpowers. How is the task force preparing to address this?" Polo Shirt took a moment, shifted in his seat, and he said, We cannot allow urban myths perpetrated by juvenile delinquents to influence law enforcement, period. The gangs provide the GCPD with enough challenges. We don't need this Skyrat character getting into street fights and car chases with them. He's not helping anyone. Scott groaned. Mom, can we turn this off? I'm trying to do my homework. She sipped her coffee. Should have done it last night. Lucretia went on. Green City Police Lieutenant Christian Raff Nicholson on the vigilante known as Skyrat, who stands accused of massive property damage in the warehouse and industrial districts in the past 6 months. A task force has been assigned in effort to capture the vigilante. Scott's heart skipped. He shook off the interview and glared at his mother. I did my homework at Espie's last night, Mum, but I left my backpack on the subway. He lied. He would have to leave for school early if he wanted a chance of getting the book bag back from the warehouse roof before the first bell rang. Espie lives 3 blocks from here. Why in the world would you take the subway? He was a deer in headlights before saying, I went to hang out with Brian afterwards. We watched a zombie movie. Who's Brian? Some dude from school. A friend. He was making up Brian right there on the spot. He likes zombie movies. Callie raised an eyebrow. Is that so? She questioned him. Well, I'm glad you have a new friend. She could smell his fibs from 30 yards on a windless day, but she was one to choose her battles. If he was getting his work done, and she wasn't getting any calls from teachers, then she was winning the war. Yeah, a new friend. Too bad about your backpack, though. You have no idea. By the time he got to the warehouse rooftop, it was gone. Laser was in the middle of lunch at his desk when his mobile phone rang. Don't waste my time, Kennedy, he said with a mouthful of noodles. It's Skyrat. He should have been in the cafeteria with his friends, but instead Scott was out back behind the school, crouching behind a dumpster in the alley. Skyrat, so glad you called. You're saving us a lot of trouble this afternoon. Laser sat forward and waved frantically to get Bog's attention from across the office. Skyrat, 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 he chuckled. Skyrat is in... Bog rushed over and handed him the school ID from the backpack. You mean Scott Turner? Lives at Roundtown Apartments with his mother Callie? Full scholarship to Green City High School? That's Skyrat? He was caught. Hey, is that the real Samantha Cyber calling you? Scott lost all hope. Oh my God, he squeaked. Bog took the phone from his partner. We don't want you, kid, he said. But someone does. There's actually a Skyrat task force, believe it or not. My man Detective Patel is on the job. I don't know why they're considering one guy a task force, but Patel's pretty good for a total quad-hole, Scott heard Laser say in the background. What do you want from me? A distraction, said Bog. Tomorrow night, Laser and I are leading a raid on one of Louie's bliss fronts, a big one. With Poseidon gone, they got a monopoly on the bliss market, and we're fighting to keep our heads above water. Now, if Louie Louie gets wind of our raid, one or two things are going to happen. She's going to call up the big guns, someone like Berserker, and they're going to come and give us one hell of a fight. Or she's going to make some phone calls, and all of the bliss and cash we seize will mysteriously disappear from the evidence locker. Laser yelled at him, and everyone we arrest will go free on technicalities or post bail and disappear. Scott rocked back and forth against the dumpster. You're gonna bust into Louie's pond tonight at exactly midnight. Make a big noise, bust some teeth in, let Louie Louie know you really mean business. She'll be working at her desk upstairs, having a double rum on ice with lime. Get some cops to do it. The police, Skyrat, require due process and warrants. Besides, the only cops we trust are already on our team, and I can't spare them. What am I supposed to say to her? You'll figure it out. Make it memorable, though, kid, and loud as hell. We need all the time you can buy us. We'll be in touch. Click. Scott didn't even get a chance to ask if he could get his math homework back before 5th period. Despite his anxiety over Bog and Laser, sleep may have swallowed Scott whole right in the middle of an interstellar history class if not for the pain in his side. It was deeply perplexing to him that at one moment he could have some Louie Louie break a knife blade over his head, leaving him without a scratch to show for it. Then later, his fight with the other Louies in the parking lot left him really quaffing messed up. His powers were so weird, it was as if there was a switch that turned them on and off, but he wasn't the one flipping it. One small victory was that his face wasn't banged up, so he didn't have to make up any excuses for looking like a punching bag. One time he got hit in the nose with a shovel by a vagrant robbing a garden supply store, explaining to his teachers that he tripped and fell face first into his dresser when he got up in the middle of the night to pee was one thing, but having to look his mom in the eyes and tell her that lie was another. Espie and Scott were walking home from school together. Espie was saying, "So if you don't recognize an ingredient on the label, it's safe to assume it's corn. History repeats itself, I guess." Scott wasn't listening. He was distracted by his rib. "Oh, that's good," he said. Annoyed, Espie shoved him. "Wake up," he called out in pain. "What the call was that for?" "You weren't listening to me," she called back in defense, softening. "Oh, geez, I'm sorry." For a second he gave her the ice pick look, but then he too softened. "It's okay." "So what? You're hurt?" "Yeah." They walked in silence for a bit. Espie hugged her books. "What happened?" "Got in a fight." There was a time when he would tell her every stupid detail of his exploits as Skyrat. Not anymore. Particularly in this case, where he had not only gotten hurt, but compromised his secret identity as well. Espie was fine without the details. "Well, I think you should take a break tonight. Come hang out with me. Something tells me the city can go one night without you." It didn't take a lot of convincing. He was exhausted. "Okay, you win. A nut off sounds cool." Relief washed over him instantly. He imagined himself relaxing on Espie's bed in front of some stupid horror movie, and he felt the tightness in his back and shoulders ease up. Maybe her sister would order pizza for them. "Finally," Espie sighed. "I had to do some shopping before going home. You okay to take a walk?" The answer he wanted to give her was the negative one, but he nodded the affirmative instead. "Yeah, I'm fine actually, though. I do have to run an errand for Mr. Bird over in the WD before we get to your place. Can you do your shopping there?" "Errand for Mr. Bird?" she sighed deeply. "The cultists? You want me to go with you to the temple?" "No Skyrat action," he insisted. "I promise. Just a train ride. I'll walk through the park and a handoff, I think. I'll keep my mask in my pocket until we get there, I promise." She relented. Saying that there was an organic grocery store on the WD side of the Sunset Park that she wanted to check out, not far from the temple. Espie had been to the doctor recently and learned that the reason she was always sick were her allergies. Corn, wheat, pollen, grass. It sounded as if she was allergic to the world. Apparently, in the old days, corn crops were bountiful and corn was used in food products across the board, as well as in everything from sunblock to gasoline. Espie wanted to research her options for corn-free, wheat-free foods, blaming society's return to old mass agriculture methods for her ailment. Pizza was off the menu. Dawn's light had arrived when the hatch at the top of the cabin opened. Jebediah climbed on the roof, still wearing the tattered uniform of a captain in the left hand. He called out to Carolyn, "It's time." He took the bird's nest, and she went to the makeshift maternity room, where her daughter's screaming had momentarily subsided. "My girl," Carolyn said, petting her daughter's hair. Akil sat on the other side of their daughter, holding her hand. Her dress was civilian. After shedding his own uniform, he burned it. The non-traitor in this cabin was Callie. She had arrived at sunset with supplies and began preparing for the birth. She was next to the girl, pulling blue nitrile gloves onto her hands, telling her about her own little boy. On seeing her mother, the girl stopped listening and cried out. "I can't," she began sobbing. "I can't do it, Mom. Please." Her mother took her hand, kissed her cheek, and said quiet words into the girl's ear. "Let's see where we're at," said Callie. She examined the girl for a moment, then told her. "Any time now," to Akil and Carolyn, she said. "Come with me," and led them into the hall, closing the door behind them. She confided, "I don't know if I can do this." "C-section?" he asked. She nodded. Carolyn's face betrayed a nuclear meltdown warning to her husband. The antibiotics had been used up. "You can, my love. You must." He took his wife's hands. "You've delivered livestock. That musk bull died, Akil." Above their heads, shots rang out from the crow's nest. "Jebediah," Akil croaked. The left hand had grasped them. Between Simpatico Plaza and the heights was Sunset Park, 3 square miles of lush green reprised from city life on the border of the residential and warehouse district. Joggers, families, and lovers in the grass, soaked in the sunshine and the kind of natural beauty that the city walls normally separated them from. Cultists in groups of 5 dotted the landscape, levitating in quiet, seated meditation. The chemical-scented cumulus trees were in full bloom, all covered in white fluff which broke away and floated like snow on the warm breeze. Museum Row flanked the southernmost edge of the park. There were some decent schools in the neighborhood, and several relatively spacious apartment buildings. One could almost stretch out here, almost feel as if they had some space for themselves. Almost. "My dad's allergic to neurobees," Scott was telling Espie as they passed a pair of robed and hooded cultists levitating in meditation off the stone walking path. "He keeps one of those shots in case he's stung. What are they called?" "Epinephrine." A holographic map was being projected from her palm. She was trying to figure out where the store was. "An EpiPen." She nearly tripped over a rock. A Labrador ran in front of them, chasing a frisbee. A couple of little kids with afros chased their spotted Anubis. "He says it could kill him if he's stung, and he didn't have an EpiPen on him." Scott plucked one of those blue flowers from the stem, sings a brief note in C sharp when you pick it. He held it out to his friend. "Terrible way to go, too. Separates the hemispheres of your brain, and it's all downhill from there," she said. "My allergies aren't that bad, but they give me one of those shots to keep with me just in case." She closed down the map and eyed the flower in disdain. "I have a couple of inhalers, too." Scott reconsidered the flower and tossed it behind him. "Cutting through the park was a bad idea, wasn't it?" he said. White light pulsed through the blue skin of 2 levitating brats to the beat of their hearts. "Probably." They maneuvered around another group of meditating cultists to the other side of the park, where glitching corporeal holographic food vendors were making and selling hot dogs and tacos from their carts. The 2 friends stepped out of the stone arch gateway to the park and onto the sidewalk. A couple of young dudes were pushing their broken-down car up the street, parallel to the park. Some jerk in an antique Honda honked at them and nearly caused an accident going around them. The young dudes yelled curses at it after it. Scott said, "I'm going to help them." Espie grabbed his arm. "What about your side?" Walking and chatting with Espie had taken his mind off it. "I'm fine. Someone should help them." He broke into a jog and caught up with the car, both doors open like wings. Scott took his position at the trunk between the two dudes. A shot of pain went through his side the moment he exerted force. The driver's side dude looked over. He was older than Scott, but not much. He had long, greasy brown hair and was in need of a shave. He smelled like booze. "Hey, thanks, man," he slurred. The bald passenger concurred. "Yeah, thanks," he said. It was Ramon, his wrist in a enhanced cast. Scott said, "No problem," hoping his reaction to Ramon's face wasn't an obvious one. "Where are we going?" The driver said, "There's a garage on the corner just a half block down on the right. See it? With the marquee?" "Sal's Auto." "That's the one." Another jerk, this one in a sleek Magna Rail car, came up fast behind them, getting uncomfortably close to Scott. He honked his horn at them, and after the oncoming traffic passed, so did the jerk. Ramon called out a few expletives after him. Yet another car pulled up behind him, this one a black and chrome hot rod hover. The driver stuck his head out the window. "I'll follow you guys, make sure no one else sneaks up on you like that." It was Springsteen, another Louie. Scott knew him from another encounter at Skyrat. He was surrounded by Louies, helping them no less, injured and in civilian garb. They were approaching the intersection. A group of a dozen cultists or so had left the park after the meditations and were beginning to cross the street at the corner. "Ramon, have you been bowling yet?" "No, he's not," said the greaseball. Scott shook his head. No. Ramon smiled ear to ear at the greaseball. "Bowling for brats!" he yelled, and they began to jog the car. Scott stopped in his tracks, and Springsteen hit him with his front end, tossing him over the hood and off to the side of the street. He groaned in pain on all fours. "Sorry, kid," Springsteen told him, not sounding at all remorseful. He stopped the vehicle right in the middle of the road to go take Scott's place at the back of his comrade's car, blocking traffic. Espie ran up to her friend, asking, "Are you okay?" He struggled to his feet. "No," said Scott. He ran back up to Springsteen and punched him in the back of the head. The guy stumbled forward and tripped over his own feet and dropped. Like a linebacker, Scott went shoulder first into the greaseball, bouncing him off the crux of the door and frame, and they both tumbled to the asphalt. An oncoming car swerved to miss them. Without Scott and the greaseball to help push, Ramon couldn't hack it with his one hand. The group of cultists, now aware of what was going down, quickened their pace. Scott and the greaseball clambered to their feet. The Louie pulled an electro knife from his pocket and engaged blade. He took a swipe at Scott, but Scott sidestepped him and put a knee into the assailant's jaw, causing the guy to bite off the tip of his tongue. Blood spurted from his mouth and he went down on the street. Ramon came around the car and Scott wasted no time, throwing a kick to the side of Ramon's left knee. It cracked, and the young Louie went down with a scream. A fist smacked against the back of Scott's skull, sending him down to his right knee. His head full of fireworks, pain erupting from his side and spreading like magma through his abdomen. Springsteen had snuck up behind him to take his revenge. "Scott!" Espie called out. She looked down to her friend, up to Springsteen, and then decked him. A crowd was gathering. Traffic had stopped at the intersection, and people were screaming complaints and curses, honking. Sirens began blaring in the distance. Scott swung his left leg and swept Springsteen from his feet. He went up and then backwards, smacking his head against the street. Another group of 5 cultists swept in between the vehicles and swarmed Scott. "What the—" They engulfed him, taking him like a tide toward the sidewalk. "What are you doing?" The one on the right said, "Come before the others arrive." Espie was running behind them, shouting, "Let him go, you weirdos!" "I can't leave her," Scott told them. He was a little fish trying to swim upstream. "Come along, girl," one of them said, breaking free of the swarm to take her arm. They pushed through the crowd and turned right at the intersection in the direction of the Temple of Divine Geometry. Scott said, "We need to see who's ever in charge of that temple." Again, the one on the right spoke. "She'll be glad to see you, Skyrat." The sheer numbers of the advancement overwhelmed them. From the sniper position, Jebediah had taken out 6 or 8 of the left-hand fighters, but he did not have the sure and steady hand of his mentor, the general. When the grenade landed next to him, his thoughts were of how he had failed his friend. He had given his life to Geronimo in the left hand until a kill had brought him under his wing. He was the only man to ever show him kindness. Geronimo was never kind. Lucas was the second to die. He had been kneeling in the doorway with his machine gun in his shoulder when the first bullet tore his left forearm apart, followed closely by the second, which entered his head through the right eye. The third casualty of the little band of revolutionary was Jeb's wife, Korubo. She was aiming her crossbow at the back of the living room when the militants burst in. The general waited patiently in his daughter's makeshift maternity ward, ready to face the advancement at the door of the room while Cully stitched the newborn's incision. Carolyn stood at her daughter's side, holding her hand, her daughter bobbing the waves of consciousness. Her mother was telling her, "Your father will hold them off while we escape through the fireplace. There's a ladder inside. It's an escape route, and there are 3 two-seater tactical jumpers on the roof for us." Akil appeared as calm as ever, attempting to joke. "Good thing we didn't light a fire." Inside, it was his heart that was on fire. "Kelly, you go first. Carolyn, you follow with the baby." "You?" Carolyn started. "I'll be right behind you." "Don't worry." He told his daughter, "That monster has laid hands on you for the last time." Downstairs, there was no one left to defend them. The Rots hurried them to the next corner and made a left. It was a dead end. Scott wasn't about to get trapped there, especially with Espie. Scott warned them, "I don't know what the plan is here, you guys, but those Louies are going to be right behind us." The one who had done the talking before said, "We know, Skyrat." Scott and Espie shared the look. "Never fear, child," one of the women said just as a pink lightning bolt flashed, exploding bricks in the wall behind them, missing Espie's head by inches. "They're coming!" shouted Espie. "This way." At the end of the alley, a brot stepped into the solid brick wall as if it were water and disappeared, leaving the brick wall rippling. Espie drew back in shock. "What the?" Another stepped through the brick wall, then another. "Wormhole," said the talker. "Go, before it closes." Razor rounds tore through the makeshift maternity room door, riddling the forms of the new mother's family. Akil was the first to fall at the front of the room, then Carolyn, and the newborn hit the floor with a dull thud by the fireplace. Callie was several rungs up the ladder, shaking violently, still not sure if she had taken any hits. She heard no cries coming from the baby. The baby's mother, also unscathed by the attack, struggled to get out of her bed but only managed to roll onto the floor. Her baby was down there too, still wet and red, lifeless. Blinding neon lights swirled around Espie and Scott, and passing beyond them at nauseating speed, a vortex of color throwing off red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, then violet firework displays with traces stretching infinitely. Their sinuses clogged. The sound was a hunting knife on a beer bottle, and they tasted copper and rosemary in their mouths. The wormhole opened into a library. Bookshelves reached up 12 feet to the ceiling. Antique furniture and lamps with green stained glass shades filled the corner. Long tables filled with seated cultists lined the room's center, some of them reading while others worked equations. They had entered the windowless room at the only part of the wall that wasn't filled with a bookshelf. Instead, there was a floor-to-ceiling oval mirror with an ornate gold frame. Their reflections stared back at them. Espie got woozy. "I need to sit down," she told her hand-holding cultist. She helped her to a chair beside a mathematician. Espie coughed into her elbow, noting that the library brats seemed disinterested in their arrival. Scott said, "What is this place?" "Welcome to the Temple of Divine Geometry," said an approaching woman. "I'm Gabriella, but my friends call me Factor." She was garbed in what might be described as cultist casual. Her skin was a paler blue than most Venusians, and her face was deformed by Kwazami's melting sickness. All the muscle mass on the left side of her face was missing, and the skin was stretched over that side of her skull like a canvas stretched across a wooden frame. He had been warned, but Scott couldn't help but wincing upon seeing her for the first time. "No way." Scott shook his head. "We're half a mile from the temple at least." Factor took a fold of her robe and stretched it between her fists, creating a flat plane between them. "We are half a mile away. If my left hand has a hold of the temple and my right hand has the park, the wormhole does this." She brought her fists together. Espie sneezed and asked the mathematician for a glass of water, telling him, "Sorry, allergies." Factor continued, "Do you understand Skyrat?" Scott looked her over. "You think I'm Skyrat?" He wore a mask of denial. "I'm just a kid." The cultist ignored him, asking again, "Do you understand the wormhole?" Scott nodded. "It brings 2 points in space together. And time." "Same difference," said the mathematician as Espie accepted a bottle of water. She took a sip and then put an inhaler to her mouth. Espie looked at his math. "Is that fractal geometry?" "As are all things." "There's no solution. It feeds itself instantly. You need a computer to do that problem and graph it. You won't get anywhere with it on paper. What's the point?" "Meditation. 300 years ago our founder discovered the grand unifying theory, the mathematical description of everything, from the universe to the individual consciousness of fundamental particles. That is the equation. We work the equation to ponder the deep mysteries that arise from it." "You believe a math equation is God?" "Not God, but the language she speaks," said Factor. "Follow me." Scott took Espie's hand and followed the robed woman out in the long hallway. "I'm the senior monk in Green City, and I run this temple, although technically we're not in the temple. We are under it." "How do you know me?" Scott asked. "Anyone who's been paying attention would know you, kid." Numbered doors lined both sides of the hall. The carpet was a colorful hodgepodge of geometric patterns and scribbles, looking like a cubist painting of vomit. "We're in an old hotel," thought Scott. It suddenly occurred to Espie that Scott was holding her hand. She withdrew it and put her hands in her pockets. Her face went red, and so did his. Breaking the awkwardness of the moment, she asked Factor, "Can I get a book or something in your gift shop to teach me that equation?" "No," Factor answered, continuing to lead them down the hall. "That requires at least a decade of breath training and meditation." Espie looked at Scott with her brow furrowed. "I've got to join your cult to learn the math? That's not very democratic." "Espie? Can you imagine if Newton or Einstein kept their secrets? We'd still be in the Quantum Dark Ages." They turned a corner, leading down another hall toward an elevator. "You're right, of course," admitted Factor. She had stopped for a moment to face Espie. "But Newton's equations won't drive an untrained mind to madness. Einstein's best work won't spiritually unravel space-time. We are no cult. We are guardians of sacred knowledge." Factor's disfigurement uneased Espie, and she couldn't maintain eye contact. The brat turned and continued toward the elevator. "Last night you intercepted a shipment from the Louies.
Within those boxes was the key to Tony Poseidon's hive mind.
White. Scott opened his mouth to speak, but Espie put her hand over it.
Scott, you had to ask more questions, she said.
She didn't trust this Factor character, or her cult, or her secret math.
For example, what do you get out of this? What help the Tonys? We are the fraternity of the formula, she said with pride. We are from the A, the B, and the C, all the way to the X, the Y, and the Z, child. We are all points of the grid. Well, that's awful convenient.
Espie,
you didn't answer my question.
Factor stopped at the elevator door and pressed the down button.
You, me, the Tonys, the Louies, the planet Mars, we are all connected. Arbitrary points in space-time field. They show compassion for one point, you show compassion for all. Everyone benefits.
She led them into the elevator.
I have something to show you.
They stepped out of the elevator into an Art Deco convention room filled wall to wall with cots. On the cots were comatose Tonys, at least a couple hundred of them. Brats went about the duty of nursing the unconscious men and the few women in the room. In his mind's eye, Scott's mother clicked a pen.
You don't have a brain between the three of you, she said.
Factor said.
When the hive mind was disabled, it left the Tonys like this. Our temples are sheltering them. Those that survive, anyway.
Scott asked.
Why aren't they in hospitals? The Louies were killing them the moment they dropped, in some cases worse. Whoever could be saved was brought to us for refuge. We have a system of sealed spaces such as this one. The only way in is by wormhole.
Espie was watching as blood was drawn from a Tony arm. The needle combined with the familiar sight of the trident tattoos sent a shiver down her spine.
Why haven't I heard about this? Why haven't I seen it on the news?
Scott knew.
The media's protecting them. It's Mrs. and Mr. Bird.
Factor nodded.
And they're people in city government, the few that are left.
The Louies would kill all of these guys if they knew about this, Scott continued.
They'd be lambs for the slaughter, realized Espie. Ducks in a barrel, said Scott. Now you brought the case, yes?
Scott handed it over. Factor opened it to spy the contents.
We can't remove the tech from the Tonys without killing them, but we can reverse engineer it with these.
She closed the case.
You're saving countless lives, Mr. Turner.
Back in the elevator, Factor hit the up button.
Louie Louie is an agent of chaos. She has no interest in hive technology, not for herself. If she wanted it, her interest was in selling it, and the only buyer for something like that.
Geronimo, Scott interrupted.
Factor concurred. Geronimo.
Geronimo was the simple god of the Iago priests. He entered the makeshift maternity ward alone and stepped over Achilles' body and knelt beside the sobbing new mother. He lifted her head by her hair. "Hello, fifth wife," he said to her. Tears flooded her cheeks. He let go of her hair, and her head dropped back to the floor with a thump. In the chimney, Kelly struggled to compose herself, to not utter a cry and give herself away. "Your father, Achille, was my most trusted general." He surveyed the bodies on the floor and the state of the room, all shredded to pieces. "All it took was for me to lay eyes off you, fifth wife, to bring that great chapter of Iago's military history to a close." His hand went to her head. "I knew you didn't love me, Louisa, but I really did believe this baby could be what we needed." Louisa cried, "Ma, ba, ba, ba." Geronimo said, "Don't be sad for our baby. He was mercy killed, out of a father's love. I will not raise a motherless son." Petting her hair, he continued, "Or the son and grandson of traitors.
He stepped back from her and crossed his arms. "Louie, Louie, consider this our divorce." He stood, blew her a kiss, and left her on the makeshift maternity room floor with the mutilated bodies of her parents and newborn child. There was no doubt in his mind that she would die there. In so many ways, she did. The blackness gave way to something like consciousness. Scott found himself in a cot in a refugee hospital tent, deep into the evil east, unable to move. His side hurt so bad, as if his rib had given up life inside of his skin and was attempting to move out and find a place of its own. He could see his abdomen pulse with each wave of pain. Tony triads were acting as nurses to patients on surrounding cots. Somehow he knew that they were being euthanized, one by one, and the triads were slowly making their way to him. Then, standing over him, were the 3 Tonys his mother had disabled with the click of a pen. They said, "Now, Skyrat, you are breaking apart." The 3 of them leaned over him with scalpels. He tried to stop them, tried to call for help, but he could do neither. They cut the broken rib out of him, but it was not a rib. It was a lizard. A chameleon. It changed from green to blue to red. Its tongue was made of fire, and it jabbed at the air, and then at him, screaming, "Burn, pigeon, burn!" Scott opened his eyes, blinked, and sat up. He was sweating profusely, his clothes and couch cushions wet. There was no more pain in his side. The clock on the wall said that it was 11 minutes after 11. Only a couple of hours since he had come home, showered, and plopped down on the couch to watch cartoons. He hadn't meant to conk out, but the sleep that had threatened him in school that afternoon ambushed him the moment he was comfortable at home. He removed his maroon hoodie and red mask from the hiding spot at the top of his closet next to a box, the contents of which being mobile phones, unopened candies, knives, a green hoodie and mask combo, and a lingerie catalog from a company in Yellow City that didn't really exist. He dressed, slipped out of his bedroom window, and ran across the rooftops of Sunset Park's apartment buildings. At the corner was his regular stop. He briefly considered taking the subway. No, he needed to wake up, to limber up, to construct a psychological mask in the shape of something resembling courage. 32 minutes later, Skyrat bounded from the Hotel Brahmagupta rooftop down onto the roof of a long-closed floral arrangement shop in a small residential neighborhood on the west side of Center Park, where Louie's pawn shop occupied a corner. It was dark inside the shop, closed now, but the lights were on upstairs. Our hero kicked in the front door, spraying glass. Guitars, electronic swords, and a variety of Janushan sidearms were secured to a display in the storefront window. He pushed the display through the glass, where it toppled over onto the sidewalk, breaking the frame of the display. Sounds from the upstairs indicated that he had someone's attention. A spinner of cheap sterling silver jewelry was topped into a sparkling case of diamond engagement rings. At the back of the shop was a door. He was set to kick it in when it opened. A blonde-haired Louie chick in a jean jacket brandished a K-76 on the other side. Skyrat swatted the sidearm away with his backhand. It went off, vaporizing a home food printer for sale in a corner. They looked at the black spot where the machine had been, and they looked at each other. "Cool," said Skyrat before punching the Louie square in the nose, knocking her back into the stairwell wall behind her. On the stairs, Rat had heard more footsteps scrambling. He ripped the banister out of the wall, freeing plaster chunks and dust, and then charged up the stairs. A girl in sunglasses with a crowbar in her hand appeared in the doorway. As he reached the hallway point of the stairs, he swiped at her with the half-banister, which she managed to avoid with an awkwardly landed jump that stumbled her forward. Instinctively, Skyrat caught her before she could fall down the stairs and sat her down to move on. As he reached the top of the stairs, she lunged for him and grabbed onto his legs as he passed the threshold, toppling him face first into wooden floorboards of the landing. He kicked blindly at her, fell to target, hopefully a face, and kicked it again. Up on his feet, he was met by some green dude in a black studded jacket with his hair and pink Liberty spikes. Skyrat planted his sneaker into the guy's chest, kicking him through the door to Louie Louie's office. Her office walls were neatly covered, floor to ceiling, in framed photos, hung salon-style. Most of the pictures were of Louies, many of which Skyrat recognized. The superhero strutted the room to his nemesis, like a brooding wrestler entering a ring. Louie Louie was sitting behind it. Kennedy sat in a chair off to the side against the wall by a bookshelf. "Louie Louie!" roared Skyrat. A series of possible follow-up retorts went through his mind. "This ends tonight," was one of them. He also thought to say, "Your reign of terror ends now." As bad as that was, what came out of his mouth was, "Business hours are over." She leaned back in her seat, coughed politely into her inner elbow. Under her reading glasses on her left eye, she wore heavy makeup in the fashion of the Egyptian god Ra, and her lips were painted blood red. A brown leather jacket covered her revealing white blouse, open halfway down her chest. She motioned to the chair in front of her desk with ringed fingers. "Sit down, please." Skyrat approached her desk. "I'll stand," he growled. He had no idea what he was doing. Whatever ideas he had while en route had drifted like a dream. He couldn't help but stare at her cleavage. Laser was right. She wore the mask of your sexy boss at the office. Louie Louie lit a cigar, took a drag, let the smoke leak upwards from her lips and nostrils. "What can I do for you?" Suddenly she sat forward and pointed the door. "Out!" she hissed. Behind him, Sunglasses and Liberty Spikes had been rallying for a sneak attack. Sunglasses said, "But Louie, get out of my building," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Both of you, take Sinatra with you. Tell Feynman to stay." Kennedy got up from his seat. He was milk-white. No, Kennedy, you stay." The muscled henchman did as he was told. Skyrat issued the first demand that popped into his head. "Tell your gang the Brots are off limits. Anyone who hurts them answers personally to me." She looked her cigar up and down. "Here's the thing, Skyrat." Her dirty bare feet went up on her desk. The cuffs of her grey pinstriped suit pants were worn to shreds. "Here's the thing, man. I never ordered those stupid initiations. That's a game the children came up with on their own, and it's sacred to them. I don't enforce initiations. I don't encourage them. I don't give a quat about the brats. They can live or die, or assign math homework to half the island on Tuesday. I don't care, you know?" The rat glared at her. "I don't like to micromanage. Besides, I'm not Tony Poseidon, and my children are not Tonys. My Louies get to think for themselves. If I tell them not to beat the brats, I may as well tell them not to throw bricks at cop cars. And if I tell them not to throw bricks at cop cars, I may as well tell them to just hand over my shipments to any kid wearing a mask pretending to be a superhero." Kennedy squirmed in his chair. Skyrat said, "You don't want me to come back here." Her legs swung off the desk, and she leaned forward, smiling, her hands dropping out of sight. "Or what will happen, young man?" she asked. Honestly, he had no idea. "Test me." "Okay." She stood up, holding a cigar in one hand and a rotoplasma cannon in the other. She came around the desk, saying, "This is going to be hard for you to hear, dear, but seeking justice is naive. It's chaos this city needs. Enough chaos to keep anyone from getting too firm of a grasp here. We've got to make this slippery, dig? Slick with chaos. Listen, you and I have the same goal. It's methods we disagree on. You want to save Green City, right? Hey!" She put her hands up in celebration. "So do I. I want to save this city from the hospital warlord whose militia sits a couple miles across the ocean from us. I want to save it from the blue alien chick who's managed to... to essentially rule our planet for a century.
She sat back against the front of her desk, arm's length from Skyrat.
You know, centuries of science fiction writers have convinced us that when aliens invade, that they'll do it with space lasers and planetary genocide. Why? So they can steal all of our precious resources. Well, it didn't happen like that, did it? When the aliens invaded, it was with a corporate hand outstretched, and we take that hand for help, sold Earth's resources, and called it good for business.
She went to open her window and watched the city go by in front of her building for a moment. The mess on the sidewalk was being cleaned by a couple of brown-nosing gangbangers. Skyrat felt like it was his turn to speak, but he didn't know what to say.
Not much anyone can do about Minister Prime. Geronimo, however, she said with a dramatic turn. Geronimo? She reconsidered this line of thought and said, I don't take threats lightly, Skyrat. When I was 13, the Left Hand murdered my family. Geronimo took everything away from me. She stopped in front of the desk again, face to face with Skyrat. I have wrestled with control of this city from crooked politicians, greedy cops, and Tony Poseidon's fat quat. The Louies are my family, my children. I will be damned if I let you threaten them.
She cocked the hand cannon. Hoping that it was true tonight, Skyrat said, That won't hurt me.
I've heard that, she said, then shot Kennedy in the chest.
Skyrat nearly jumped out of his shirt sleeve. Kennedy rolled on the floor, clutching his chest, groaning, bleeding. The rat felt powerless. He took a step back, gasping, You cold thing shot him!
Louie Louie went back to her desk, puffed a cigar, and put her feet back up. You took something that is mine, something very important. You care about the brats? Then you have 24 hours to give me what is mine before I unleash hell on them. My children will storm every cultist temple in the city with blunt instruments and beat to death every brat and snoozing Tony we find. All of the blood running in the gutters will be on your hands, Skyrat.
He stood there, speechless. She knew.
That's right. I know all about the Tonys and the brats. Secrets are fleeting creatures, my friend.
She tossed the remainder of the cigar out the window.
24 hours, Skyrat.
And like a coward, like the little boy he was, Skyrat retreated from Louie's pawn in defeat. Louie Louie dropped her sidearm on her desk and leaned back in her chair with a sigh.
Feynman?
She called out. A moment later, her assistant appeared in the doorway. She was a fresh-faced 19-year-old. This was like an internship for her.
Lou? She said, shifting her weight from foot to foot. Just got a call from Detective Patel. The DOP raided our spot on 106. They are there now. Says he didn't know anything about it. He says nobody at the precinct knew.
Louie Louie rocked in her chair, staring at nothing in particular outside of her office window, ruminating. On the floor, Kennedy groaned.
Feynman? She said. Yeah, Louie Louie?
She motioned toward Kennedy.
Have someone get this coughing rapist out of my office.